Elizabeth Smart was abducted from her Utah home.
The abduction captured the nation's attention.
Elizabeth Smart was taken from her bedroom in the middle of the night.
Elizabeth, if you're out there, we're doing everything we possibly can to help you.
39 hours after the disappearance.
4 weeks since an unknown gunman.
I absolutely know Elizabeth is still alive.
Yes, I think I see that Emmanuel they're looking for.
We're hoping someone would recognize this face.
Dangerous bad guy.
They had a veil that would cover them, so all you could see were their eyes.
Needed somebody to save her.
Can't believe this kind of stuff happens.
June 5, 2002. A 14-year-old girl sleeping peacefully in her bedroom is woken at knife point by a stranger who had worked at their house. "Get up and come with me or I'll kill you and your family," he whispers. For the next 9 months, Elizabeth Smart would be held captive, raped daily, and told she was now the wife of a delusional religious fanatic. But this isn't just a story of unimaginable suffering, it's the story of how one girl's incredible strength, intelligence, and will to survive helped her endure hell on earth and ultimately become one of America's most powerful advocates for survivors. You're about to hear how Elizabeth Smart was rescued after 9 months of captivity that gripped the entire nation, how she faced her captors in court with incredible courage, and how she transformed her trauma into a mission to help other survivors. Her kidnapper got life in prison, but her real victory was refusing to let evil define her life. Stay with me because Elizabeth's story proves that even in the darkest circumstances, the human spirit can not only survive but thrive. Elizabeth and Smart was living the kind of childhood that many families dream of providing for their children. Born on November 3, 1987, Elizabeth grew up in a loving, close-knit Mormon family in the Federal Heights neighborhood of Salt Lake City, Utah. The Smart family embodied many of the values that made their community strong: faith, education, service to others, and an unshakable belief in the importance of family bonds. Ed Smart, Elizabeth's father, was a successful real estate professional who had worked hard to provide his family with both material comfort and emotional security. Lois Smart, her mother, was a devoted homemaker and community volunteer who had created a warm, nurturing environment where her 6 children could flourish. The family lived in a beautiful home that reflected both their success and their values. It was a place where neighborhood children were always welcome and where family activities took precedence over material possessions. Elizabeth was the second oldest of the Smart children, and she had grown into a remarkable young woman by age 14. She was an accomplished student who excelled academically while also pursuing her passion for music. Elizabeth played the harp beautifully, and her musical talents were a source of pride for both her and her family. She was also deeply involved in her Mormon faith, participating in church activities and service projects that reflected the family's commitment to helping others. What made Elizabeth particularly special was her combination of intelligence, kindness, and natural leadership. Her teachers and family friends often commented on her maturity and her ability to connect with people of all ages. She was the kind of teenager who still enjoyed spending time with her family, who took her responsibilities as an older sister seriously, and who seemed to have unlimited potential for whatever path she might choose in life. The Smart family home was a hub of activity, with children's friends constantly coming and going, family dinners that brought everyone together, and a schedule filled with school events, church activities, and family adventures. It was exactly the kind of environment that parents hope to create: safe, loving, and full of opportunities for growth and happiness. In the months leading up to Elizabeth's kidnapping, the Smart family had done what many families do when they need help with home maintenance and improvement projects. They had hired workers to help with various tasks around their property. Among these workers was a man who called himself Emmanuel, though his real name was Brian David Mitchell. Mitchell was a 49-year-old drifter with a history of mental illness and religious delusions, but to the Smart family, he initially seemed like just another handyman trying to make an honest living. He had approached them about doing roofing work, and Ed Smart, who believed in giving people opportunities and helping those who seemed to be struggling, had hired him for some projects around the house. During the time he worked for the family, Mitchell would have had opportunities to observe the family's routines, to learn the layout of their home, and to identify which family members slept where. He was quiet and seemed competent at his work, giving the family no obvious reason to be concerned about his presence on their property. What the Smart family couldn't have known was that Mitchell was developing an obsession with their daughter Elizabeth. He later claimed that he had received divine revelations, that Elizabeth was meant to be his wife, and that God had commanded him to take her. These delusions were fueled by his severe mental illness and his twisted interpretation of religious concepts, but they would drive him to commit one of the most notorious kidnappings in American history. Mitchell's wife, Wanda Barzee, was not just aware of her husband's plans, she was an active participant in them. Barzee, who was 57 years old at the time, had her own history of mental illness and had become completely devoted to her husband's delusional religious beliefs. She would later play a crucial role not only in Elizabeth's kidnapping but in the daily abuse and control that would define the next 9 months of the teenager's life. On the night of June 5, 2002, the Smart family went to bed as they had countless times before, with no reason to believe that their lives were about to be shattered forever. Elizabeth shared a bedroom with her 9-year-old sister Mary Catherine, and the two girls had settled in for what they expected to be another peaceful night's sleep in their safe, secure home. At approximately 1 a.m., Elizabeth was awakened by someone holding a knife to her throat. In the darkness of her bedroom, she could barely make out the figure of a man standing over her bed, but his voice was calm and deadly serious as he delivered an ultimatum that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "Get up and come with me or I'll kill you and your family." Elizabeth later described the surreal quality of those first moments, the disbelief that this could actually be happening, the terror of realizing that her worst nightmare was becoming reality, and the immediate understanding that her compliance might be the only thing standing between her family and violence. She could see her little sister Mary Catherine in the bed next to hers, and she knew that any resistance on her part could put not only herself but her entire family in danger. Mitchell forced Elizabeth to put on shoes and a robe, then led her at knife point out of the house and into the Utah wilderness. As they walked away from her home in the early morning hours, Elizabeth had no way of knowing that she wouldn't see her family again for 9 months, or that the man who was taking her believed he had a divine right to do whatever he wanted with her. The kidnapping itself was both carefully planned and shockingly simple. Mitchell had studied the family's routines, had identified the easiest point of entry into their home, and had chosen a time when he was unlikely to be detected. He had cut through a screen door to gain access to the house, had navigated directly to Elizabeth's bedroom, and had successfully removed her from the premises without waking any other family members except Mary Catherine, who was too frightened to immediately raise an alarm. Once Mitchell had successfully removed Elizabeth from her home, he took her to a crude campsite in the foothills above Salt Lake City where Wanda Barzee was waiting. It was here that Elizabeth's true nightmare began, as Mitchell and Barzee began the process of breaking down her identity and rebuilding her as someone they could control completely. The first thing Mitchell did was perform what he called a marriage ceremony, declaring that Elizabeth was now his wife and that God had commanded their union. This ceremony was both a reflection of Mitchell's delusions and a calculated psychological attack designed to make Elizabeth feel that she had somehow become complicit in her own abuse. Barzee played a crucial role in this psychological manipulation, presenting herself as Mitchell's first wife who was welcoming Elizabeth into their family. For the next 9 months, she was raped daily, tied up, and threatened with death if she attempted to escape. The systematic nature of the abuse was designed not just to satisfy Mitchell's twisted desires, but to completely break Elizabeth's spirit and make her believe that resistance was both futile and dangerous. The physical conditions of Elizabeth's captivity were deliberately harsh and degrading. She was often kept chained or tethered to trees, given minimal food and water, and forced to live in conditions that were designed to make her feel less than human. Mitchell and Barzee moved their camp frequently, always staying in remote areas where Elizabeth's cries for help would not be heard and where discovery by authorities was unlikely. But perhaps even more devastating than the physical abuse was the psychological manipulation that Mitchell and Barzee employed to maintain control over their victim. Everything that my captors threatened to do to me or wanted to do to me, they did. They told her that her family had stopped looking for her, that she was now considered damaged goods, who could never return to her old life, and that her only option was to accept her new role as Mitchell's wife. While Elizabeth was enduring daily hell in the Utah wilderness, her family and law enforcement agencies were conducting one of the most intensive missing person searches in American history. The disappearance of a 14-year-old girl from her own bedroom in what seemed to be a safe, upscale neighborhood captured the attention of the entire nation and prompted an unprecedented response from both official agencies and ordinary citizens. Ed and Lois Smart became the public faces of the search for their daughter, appearing on television programs, organizing search parties, and never giving up hope that Elizabeth was still alive and could be rescued. Their faith, dignity, and determination in the face of every parent's worst nightmare inspired millions of people and helped keep Elizabeth's case in the national spotlight. The search effort involved thousands of volunteers, professional search and rescue teams, FBI agents, local police officers, and even psychics and other individuals who claimed to have information about Elizabeth's whereabouts. Flyers with Elizabeth's photograph were distributed across the country, and her image became one of the most recognizable faces in America as the months passed without any sign of her. What made the search particularly challenging was the lack of solid leads or physical evidence. Mary Catherine, Elizabeth's younger sister, had witnessed the kidnapping but had been too frightened to get a good look at the perpetrator. For months, she struggled to remember details that might help identify the man who had taken her sister, while dealing with her own trauma and guilt about not being able to prevent the kidnapping. The case took several unexpected turns as investigators pursued various leads and suspects. There were false sightings, wrongful accusations, and numerous dead ends that raised and dashed the family's hopes repeatedly. The intense media coverage, while helpful in keeping Elizabeth's case in the public eye, also created pressure and scrutiny that made an already impossible situation even more difficult for the Smart family. During her 9 months of captivity, Elizabeth Smart demonstrated a level of mental and emotional strength that was remarkable for someone so young. Rather than allowing herself to be completely broken by the abuse and psychological manipulation, she found ways to maintain her sense of self and her connection to the life she had been taken from. One of the keys to Elizabeth's survival was her ability to compartmentalize her experiences and to maintain hope that she would eventually be rescued. She later described how she would mentally separate herself from what was happening to her body, focusing on memories of her family and on her faith that somehow, someday, she would be free again. Elizabeth also demonstrated remarkable intelligence in her interactions with her captors. She learned to read Mitchell's moods and to behave in ways that would minimize the violence and abuse directed toward her. She participated in their daily routines and religious rituals not because she believed in them, but because resistance would only have made her suffering worse. Elizabeth Smart says Kidnapper was a master at manipulation, but she was equally masterful at psychological survival. She found ways to maintain her identity and her values even while being forced to participate in activities that were completely contrary to everything she had been taught. Perhaps most importantly, Elizabeth never completely gave up hope that she would be rescued. Even in her darkest moments, she held on to the belief that her family was still looking for her and that eventually she would be found. This hope became a source of strength that helped her endure experiences that might have completely destroyed someone with less resilience. On March 12, 2003, 15-year-old Elizabeth Smart is finally found in Sandy, Utah, 9 months after being abducted. The rescue came about through a combination of police work, family persistence, and what many observers could only describe as miraculous timing. The breakthrough in the case came when Mary Catherine Smart finally remembered where she had seen the man who kidnapped her sister. After months of struggling with fragmented memories, she realized that the kidnapper was Emmanuel, the handyman who had worked at their house. This recognition provided investigators with the lead they needed to identify Brian David Mitchell as their primary suspect. Once they knew who they were looking for, police were able to track Mitchell, Barzee, and Elizabeth to the Salt Lake City area. Her alleged kidnappers, Brian David Mitchell, a drifter who the Smarts had briefly employed at their house, and his wife, Wanda Barzee, were charged with the kidnapping as well as burglary and sexual assault. The actual rescue occurred when police officers spotted 3 individuals walking along a street in Sandy, Utah, a Salt Lake City suburb. Something about the group seemed suspicious to the officers, and when they approached to investigate, they discovered that one of the individuals was Elizabeth Smart, who had been disguised by her captors with different clothing and a wig. The moment when Elizabeth was able to identify herself to police officers marked the end of one of the most intensive missing person searches in American history and the beginning of her long journey toward healing and justice. The news of her rescue was broadcast across the nation, and millions of people who had followed her case for 9 months celebrated the miracle of her survival. The prosecution of Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzee proved to be almost as complex and drawn out as the search for Elizabeth had been. Mitchell's history of mental illness and his bizarre religious delusions created challenges for the legal system, as his attorneys argued that he was not competent to stand trial for his crimes. Federal prosecutors took over, and a judge ruled Mitchell was faking mental illness. This determination was crucial to ensuring that Mitchell would face trial for his crimes rather than being committed to a mental health facility where he might eventually be released. Elizabeth's testimony during the trial was remarkable for both its courage and its impact. Now older and stronger than she had been during her captivity, she faced her former captors in court and described in detail the abuse and psychological manipulation she had endured. During the attacks, Barzee would sit next to Smart and encourage her husband to continue to rape me, Smart recalled during a press conference. Her testimony was not just crucial for securing convictions, it was also a powerful demonstration of her refusal to be silenced or intimidated by the people who had tried to destroy her. Elizabeth's willingness to speak publicly about her experiences, despite the personal cost and the intense media scrutiny, helped other survivors of sexual abuse and kidnapping find their own voices. Mitchell is serving 2 life terms after he was sentenced in 2011. A year earlier, Barzee was given 15 years for her role in Smart's kidnapping and sexual assault. The sentences reflected both the severity of the crimes and the court's recognition that Mitchell posed an ongoing danger to society. Brian David Mitchell sits in federal prison in Indiana. He is serving a life sentence for the abduction and rape of Elizabeth Smart. The life sentence ensures that Mitchell will never again have the opportunity to harm another child, providing some measure of justice for Elizabeth and some protection for potential future victims. Barzee's shorter sentence reflected her cooperation with authorities and her lesser role in the crimes, though Elizabeth and her advocates argued that Barzee's participation in the abuse and her encouragement of Mitchell's violence deserved harsher punishment. Barzee was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison in 2009 for her role in the abduction, although she was granted early release on September 19, 2018. The early release of Barzee was controversial and concerning to Elizabeth and her family, who worried about the message it sent to other survivors and about Barzee's potential to reoffend. The woman who kidnapped and held Elizabeth Smart captive for 9 months in the early 2000s was arrested in Utah this week after visiting at least 2 parks, which she can't do because of her status as a sex offender. One of the most remarkable aspects of Elizabeth Smart's story is not just how she survived her ordeal, but how she transformed her experience into a force for positive change. Rather than retreating from public life or allowing her trauma to define her future, Elizabeth chose to become an advocate for survivors of sexual abuse, kidnapping, and other violent crimes. Remarkably, Smart managed to return to a relatively normal life shortly after rejoining her family. Only weeks after her return, she hiked with her family to the camp where Mitchell had held her captive, demonstrating a level of emotional strength and resilience that amazed even her family and therapists. Elizabeth went on to graduate from high school, attend college, and pursue her goals of helping other survivors. She became a frequent speaker at conferences and events focused on child safety, survivor support, and criminal justice reform. Her willingness to share her story publicly has helped countless other survivors find the courage to speak out about their own experiences. She has also worked to change laws and policies related to missing persons cases, child protection, and victim rights. Her advocacy has contributed to improvements in how law enforcement agencies respond to kidnapping cases and how the justice system treats survivors of sexual violence. As for Smart, she's now married and finishing work on her degree when this reporting was done years ago. Elizabeth has since completed her education, built a successful career as an advocate and public speaker, and created a family of her own. Her ability to build a life filled with love, purpose, and joy serves as an inspiration to survivors everywhere. Elizabeth's case also had broader impacts on missing persons investigations, child safety protocols, and public awareness of kidnapping and sexual abuse. The intense media coverage of her case, while sometimes problematic, also helped educate the public about the realities of child abduction and the importance of never giving up hope for missing children. The case demonstrated the power of family persistence, community support, and law enforcement dedication in solving even the most challenging missing persons cases. The Smart family's refusal to give up hope, combined with the tireless work of investigators and volunteers, proved that even when cases seem hopeless, breakthroughs are still possible. Elizabeth Smart's story offers profound lessons about human resilience, the power of hope, and the importance of refusing to let evil have the final word. Her ability to survive 9 months of unimaginable abuse while maintaining her essential humanity and her connection to the people who loved her demonstrates the incredible strength of the human spirit. Her transformation from victim to survivor to advocate shows that trauma, while devastating, does not have to define a person's entire life. Elizabeth's choice to use her experience to help others and to work for positive change demonstrates that even the most horrible experiences can ultimately contribute to something meaningful and beneficial. Perhaps most importantly, Elizabeth's story reminds us that survival is not just about enduring trauma, it's about reclaiming your life and your voice after that trauma has ended. Her willingness to speak publicly about her experiences, to face her captors in court, and to work for changes that will protect other potential victims shows what true courage looks like. Today, Elizabeth Smart continues her work as an advocate, author, and public speaker. She has written books about her experience and her recovery, appeared in documentaries and news programs, and worked with organizations focused on child protection and survivor support. Her message to other survivors is one of hope and empowerment. She emphasizes that while trauma can have lasting effects, it does not have to control a person's future. She encourages survivors to seek help, to speak out when they feel ready, and to remember that they are more than what happened to them. Elizabeth's continuing work ensures that her ordeal serves a greater purpose, protecting other children, supporting other survivors, and demonstrating that even in the darkest circumstances, the human spirit can not only endure but ultimately triumph. The kidnapping and rescue of Elizabeth Smart represents one of the most remarkable survival stories in modern American history. Her ordeal was unimaginably horrific, but her response to that ordeal has been nothing short of inspirational. Elizabeth Smart refused to be defined by the worst thing that ever happened to her. Instead, she chose to define herself by her response to that trauma, her courage in facing her captors in court, her commitment to helping other survivors, and her determination to build a life filled with love, purpose, and meaning. Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzee are exactly where they belong, Mitchell serving life in prison and Barzee under strict supervision as a registered sex offender. But their imprisonment is not the real victory in this case. The real victory is Elizabeth Smart's refusal to let them win, her transformation from victim to survivor to advocate, and her ongoing work to protect other children from experiencing what she endured. Elizabeth Smart's story proves that even in our darkest moments, hope is possible. Even when evil seems to triumph, good can ultimately prevail. Even when trauma threatens to destroy us, we can choose to rebuild ourselves into something stronger and more compassionate than we were before. Her voice continues to speak for survivors everywhere, reminding us that we are more resilient than we know, that healing is possible even after the worst trauma, and that sometimes the most powerful response to evil is simply refusing to let it have the final word in our stories.